Welcome to an honest conversation on the complex relationship between the world and the Jewish people. Please like, comment, subscribe below if you think these conversations are important. Despite many positive contributions in virtually every area of human endeavor, we see that anti-Semitism is on the rise with renewed vigor. It's not confined to any one area or one form of expression, and it's becoming violent in many cases. Whatever we're doing, it wasn't getting to the heart of the issue. In fact, a recent poll I saw by CNN Comrade's poll, I don't know if you saw it, interviewed more than 7,000 people across Europe, found, among other things, that a quarter of Hungarians and a fifth of British and Polish respondents estimated that the world is more than 20% Jewish compared to the actual 0.2%. So it gives you a sense of, gave me a sense of just the strange relationship. And I was fascinated by the Kabbalistic explanation of this problem and Kabbalah's proposed solution. And I wanted to see what others, Jews and non-Jews, thought about it. So with me today is obviously the Michael Laitman, Doctor of Biocybernetics and PhD in Philosophy and Kabbalah, author of more than 70 books translated into 30 languages, including Like a Bundle of Reeds, Why Unity and Mutual Guarantee Are the Call of the Hour. Hi, Dr. Laitman. Good to have you. And also with me today is Mark Weber, historian, author, lecturer, current affairs analyst, who is also the director of the Institute for Historical Review. Thanks for joining the conversation, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
I want to actually start with you because you have a very interesting article, Anti-Semitism, why does it exist? Why does it persist? I really found it fascinating. You quote former ADL National Director Abraham Foxman saying how anti-Semitism resembles a disease being fundamentally irrational. It's a spiritual and psychological illness. Found it very interesting. And then, jumping to the end, there's a lot of interesting things there. You conclude by saying that anti-Semitism is actually not a mysterious disease. Anti-Semitism is the natural and understandable attitude of people toward a minority with particularist loyalties that wields greatly disproportionate power for its own interests, rather than for the common good. Right. So can you explain what you mean? How does that maybe serve to explain anti-Semitism?
Right. Well, just like when we're using the terms like anti-Semitism or racism, we're talking about really, I think, two different phenomena. One is a kind of vulgar hatred or dislike or abhorrence or rudeness to other people because of their background. And the other is a kind of larger cultural phenomenon that takes place in somewhat the same way that people who may feel that, the same way that race is talked about. Some people have an attitude about race which is very emotional, very personal, very subjective based on their own experiences. But I try to look at things historically. Why is, throughout the ages and why in our own time, is there this tension between Jews and non-Jews? Or for a larger, in a similar way, why is there tension? Why are there problems between different ethnic and racial groups, not least in the Middle East, as we all know? And I like to think, everybody likes to think that we're not motivated and not moved by irrational or hateful feelings. And I don't feel any hatred for anyone, and I don't wish anybody ill because of his or her background. But so we try to, I think it's very important to understand this phenomenon, not in terms of, you might say, emotional trigger words like hate or fear, but to try to understand why this exists as a phenomenon, not only in the world we live in today, but in throughout the ages, in many different cultures over the centuries. Why has this tension, why has this problem existed of relations between Jews and non-Jews? In the article that you cited, I mentioned and cited Abraham Foxman and others too, who talk about anti-Semitism, as you'll oftentimes hear in the media, as a disease. It's a virus. We don't know where it comes from. It's an irrational hatred. And supposedly we have to fight it by, well, one answer they say is more Holocaust memorials and more Holocaust museums or more education. But that seems to me to miss the point of the larger phenomenon. Obviously, a phenomenon that has existed for many centuries isn't going to be tied into any one historical epic, the Holocaust, or any other one thing. But in the article that you cited, I also quoted Theodor Herzl. And I quoted Herzl because Herzl is well regarded, of course, by Israelis, by Zionists, by most Jews, because he's the founder of the modern Zionist movement. And his major book that began the Zionist movement is The Jewish State. And in The Jewish State and in other writings, Theodor Herzl also tries to come to this, to grips with this question of why does anti-Semitism exist? And the answer he provides is very, very different than the answer that Abraham Foxman or the ADL or many other people give. Theodor Herzl, I think, is much more realistic in saying that the fundamental reason that this problem exists is because Jews are a separate people with their own agenda, their own interests. It doesn't mean that a group that has its own interests or its own agenda is bad or evil, but inevitably, different groups have different perceptions about things and different agendas, different priorities about how problems should be dealt with. And if Jews exist in a society of non-Jews, and at the same time say, well, we're just like you, we're part of the same society, while simultaneously maintaining a separate identity and a separate loyalty, that inevitably is going to lead to problems. And that's why I say that anti-Semitism, I think, exists and has existed because there's no way to peacefully or easily reconcile these irreconcilable differences. That is, these irreconcilable objectives, both to be considered the same and citizens like everyone else in a society, while at the same time maintaining a separate identity with separate objectives and separate goals. So that's basically the point of my article. And I think that's the basic point that I think Theodor Herzl also had. And that's why he proposed Zionism, that is a country for Jews who would thereby live there and become, in his idea, in his mind, a normal people like everyone else with a country of their own.
So it's interesting because Kabbalah describes Jews as a group of people united around an ideal of unity about 3,500 years ago, and later gets mixed with the nations of the world, only to be summoned again to unite the entire world. Interesting. So I want to ask Dr. Laitman, how does this explanation of Kabbalah, how does it relate to anti-Semitism?
Kabbalah. Well, Kabbalah, first of all, like you started explaining, it begins from the origins of that group called the people of Israel. It started about 3,500 years ago in ancient Babylon. In that time, most of humanity was centralized. The cultural center of humanity was in that place, the cradle of human civilization. But what happened was an eruption of the human ego between human beings, and that brought social conflicts and feuds and rifts in human society. At that time, there was a spiritual leader. That leader was named Abraham, and he was essentially researching what's happening with the people, with the Babylonian people. And what he found out was that there is a problem here, or a natural dynamic, and that is that human ego is growing. And because the human egoism grew, people stopped living like kin, living with each other, and began to have competing agendas, and various conflicts arose, and they divided to different factions and different interests. So what he did was he called upon the Babylonian people. This is, by the way, referenced in various sources, that both him and his father were actually like spiritual leaders or priests of the Babylonian people. But what he did was he told the Babylonian people, we have to try to rise above the division, above the human egoism, and start working on human unity. And if you're interested in that, follow me. Then, like Josephus writes and other sources, until the Maimonides in the more or less the 12th century, many people came to him and joined him. He was a known personality. And the people who followed him were gathered as a group based on the principle of human connection covers all differences. What he taught them was that the human ego naturally grows. It has to grow. Sometimes it grows in a linear way, and at times there is exponential peaks in its development, leaps. And he told them there's no other choice. We have to work with this growing human ego. It's a natural dynamic. What we have to do is learn how to rise above that, how to increase our connection above the growing ego. The more the human ego grows, the more we have to consciously, actively increase human connection. And that's how we can maintain a proper, balanced, good state in society. So the people who followed him were later called Jews, Yehudim. That comes from the word Yehud, unity. He united them. They were united around that principle. And he also explained to them this, that through the unity among them, the conscious unity among them, they can discover the greater unifying force of nature. This is also called God or upper force. In Gematria, which is the numerical value of letters in Hebrew, these nature and God are synonymous. And so he called that group who were practicing this, they were also called Israel, which is a combination of two words, Yashar El, which means straight to God, or straight to attainment of that higher, greater force of nature. So they were people who came from the various tribes and clans and groups that existed in ancient Babylon. But later, they scattered across humanity. But that group essentially became what's called the group of the group of Israel. So the people of Israel are originally not a nation. There's no such nation. They are rather a collection of all those various groups and nations, so to speak, that lived in ancient Babylon. And what happened in Babylon, that clash and social conflict, and what is symbolized as the Tower of Babel, and all that, there's a lot of interesting research about that, but let's not go into all these details. So that group went out of Babylon, and since then they were a group called Israel, Yisrael, working on their unity as the main principle that leads that group. And so they existed that way until the ruin, the destruction of the temple in their land, which was about, let's say, 200 years more or less after, within Common Era. And so then they were expelled from there. Why did this expulsion happen? Because they stopped adhering to the Abrahamic method. They stopped working on their connection. And then what's called unfounded hatred began to naturally rise in them, and they didn't hold on together, and they scattered. But that group, when they stop holding on to their connection that is above all of the differences that they have, they can't hold on as a single group, because they are actually representatives of all the different nations that existed in ancient Babylon. They're a mini model of all of humanity. And so they don't feel a natural connection that every other nation feels. The French, the English people, the Italian, whoever they are, they all have an original connection, and the Jews don't. They don't feel that kind of connection. What they do have is a sense of hatred from the outer world that keeps them together, and if not, they scatter. And this is happening and has been going on to this day. However, the world, in the meantime, keeps developing. Human egoism keeps growing in each and every generation as a natural dynamic. It grows. And along with it, the Jews are no longer connected to that original group so much. It's a scattered group. 10 tribes of it were lost completely, and only 2 tribes are left, which is, let's say, 20% of all that group. However, the fact that they had established for a certain period of time, let's say about 1,500 years more or less, they maintained that connection, that higher level of human connection, that gave them a sensation of how the higher force of nature, the global force that sustains reality, works. And that's why they have a different attitude to reality, to creation, to themselves, and to the world. And it also enables them, seemingly enables them to be smarter, to be more productive, more capable than other people. Now, all of this is explained in the authentic wisdom of Kabbalah, which I engage in. And what the wisdom of Kabbalah explains to us is that the world ultimately comes to a point at which, whether it wants it or not, there is an inevitable process that leads humanity to a globalized situation, where all of humanity is naturally pushed to become a single entity around the planet. It is similar to what happened in ancient Babylon, where all of humanity is connected, interconnected on the one hand, interdependent, but on the other hand, we despise each other and we can't get along with each other. These are 2 opposite forces that run the evolution of human society. And so that takes us back to the same point, to the same work that group needs to do. It needs to demonstrate to the world how to maintain human connection in the right way, how to cover all the differences with human connection, or love, if you will. And that's the only way to bring about correction in the world. Otherwise, we'll devour each other and fight with each other, and war will continue to happen. And so the hatred towards Jews is a hatred that extends from generation to generation, because it's a deep-seated demand from them, because they don't do their role in making the effort to demonstrate that connection they're supposed to demonstrate to humanity. And so in our time, when we're coming towards this global age, this interconnected era, the hatred towards the Jews is rising even more in its intensity. And I understand it. I understand why this is happening. It's because people around the world, in the nations of the world, they have a sense that this group of people are holding on the keys to something, that they keep it away. However, the Jews themselves, most of them don't know it. That's the problem. If you speak to most Jews, they'll tell you, I don't know, that we actually have a method for human connection, for human correction, for the evolution of human society towards the global force of nature and coming to balance with nature. They don't know about it. Only the authentic wisdom of Kabbalah explains this. And the wisdom of Kabbalah for all these thousands of years was kept hidden. Only now it's becoming revealed, because in our time, the 20th and 21st century, is where the world is coming to this globally integrated state, where we're becoming globally interdependent. And that's why this method of human connection can be realized across all of humanity. And that's why the wisdom of Kabbalah is becoming revealed. And I'm one of those Kabbalists who are trying to publicize this wisdom to the world and explain why anti-Semitism exists, and that it's not going to help us to hate each other and provoke hate between all those people, that we have to try to rise above those sensations between us and see the existence of humanity as a whole as the problem that is the mutual problem for all of us. We all have to become in balance with the global force of nature, and not try to fight with each other about who's right and wrong, and like children do. That's what I'm hoping that we'll get to. So I'm very happy to speak to people like you who research the matter, and perhaps we can find a common approach of how to explain to people how to make the world peaceful and whole. To tell you that I'm very accepted among Jews? No. To tell you that many Jews despise me? Absolutely. They don't want to listen to what I'm saying. They don't agree because they're still egoistic and they're not corrected. It's not the same Jews who came to Abraham 3,500 years ago. Today, Jews are mostly engaged with how to profiteer as much as they can, how to take more out of this life as much as possible. They are resistant to hearing that they have an obligation to make that human connection possible, to demonstrate that method of human connection that they possess, that they carry to the world, and that will enable all of us to become a single humanity. And then it's not about the hatred that will subside. It's about a new level of human development, because all of humanity is coming to a dead end these days. All right, I'll stop here.
I have a question, if I could.
Sure.
My question is,
Sure.
and I've listened very closely to what you had to say with great interest. Does the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 and the rise of Zionism in the 20th century and into our own time contribute or detract from reaching the goal that you're laying out?
That is only a condition. It works as a condition. The Jews, gathering again in a single place, on a single land, are capable of realizing their method of connection and show it to the world from there. Now, if they do it, they have a right to exist. If not, they don't. They will not have a right to exist here.
So it sounds like you're saying then the only way that the State of Israel has a right to exist is if it plays an important role in unifying humanity.
Yes.
I see. But of course, the reality since the founding of the State of Israel has been a time of tension and dispute and almost continued tension between Israel and neighbors, and of course, Arab population of Israel. So it's hard to see how one can get closer to this goal, given the reality that we've seen over the past 70 years.
I agree with you here 100%. It's very, very difficult. I operate here in Israel, trying to explain all of these things for at least 40, 45 years, if you look at the whole scope. And unfortunately, I would say that there's very little success. And that's also why we're beginning to see the deterioration of the state of Israel. Unlike what happened, say, about 50 or 60 years ago, the world looked at this place with a hope that something good will emerge. But today, no one expects something good to come from here, and everyone is looking at this place with a discontent. And they're right. I keep trying to try to explain to the people of Israel what is their obligation to the world. Because look, we have no choice. This is part of the natural dynamic of human evolution. It's embedded in the laws of nature. This kernel of human connection exists in this group, and they have to realize it. And if it won't happen, it'll be an end to this land of Israel, to the state of Israel. This group will once again disintegrate and scatter across the nations of the world, and it will continue, who knows, until when.
I have another question. The goal that you laid out and the original concept that Abraham laid out that you explained seems to me, and again, I'm not a specialist, seems to be, however, very different than the sentiment and the outlook that you can find in much of the Torah, which emphasizes the separateness of the Jewish people from the rest of humanity and emphasizes a kind of, well, different status between Jews and the rest of humanity, which seems to be rather contradictory, rather different than the vision that you said was laid out by Abraham and you say should be the vision embraced by the Jewish people today.
The Jew, again, comes from the word yichud, or yachad, which means unity, togetherness, meaning that if different people, opposite different people, actually come together, then they're called a Jew. Because again, I say, it's not an original nation. It's a collection of very different people. And they can be black, white, or yellow from any kind of, so to speak, nationality. If they actually work on human connection on that higher level, then they're called Jewish. So a Frenchman, let's say, can become a Jew. There's no problem. The fact that there's this appearance of a Jewish mother and all that, that's a historical consequence. It's not the original the original source. So a Jew is not a nationality, it's not nationhood, it's a collection of people who wanted to connect above the human ego that repels them, that separates them, and yet they wanted to consciously work on their connection. That is what gave them the name Jews, according to that desire to work on their higher level of unity. So today, we can't even call this group of people a nation, and we can't even call them Jews. It refers to their history, to their ancestors. Today, they don't behave as Jews. And so, still, however, there still resides this, how to call it, let's say, spiritual gene of human unity. It exists in them, and it needs to be rekindled, reawakened. And it can be reawakened by activating that method of connection, which is essentially the same wisdom of Kabbalah, which is the same ancient teaching of Abraham that connected that group of people based on that. So what we need to do today, again, based on the wisdom of Kabbalah and how I see it from that perspective, is that we need to bring everyone on board, not just Jews, everyone who knows and feels that this higher level of connection is required. And that's also why, if you look at my organization, our activity is open to everyone. We have students from all over the world, from Africa and South America, North America, of course, Europe, China, everywhere. Everywhere. And we have to reconnect the people who want to rise to that higher level of connection, because humanity inevitably is being pushed to this. This is not something that we have where we have a choice in the matter. So who are the people who are coming together? The people who feel a desire for it, who feel that it's required, who feel the necessity, just like in the days of Abraham. And so if people participate in that, they become the center of human connection for humanity. And the people who were Jews according to their history, the people that today we call them Jews, but again, they don't understand what they are and where they're from, they still carry that spiritual gene. And it's because their ancestors, because they actually originated in that group. And that's why it needs to be reawakened in them. So that's it. That's the whole major challenge and major problem that humanity is facing with regards to that people of Israel. Humanity doesn't understand what's happening with that group. It's better for it not to exist, and it's true. According to what we see today, they're not serving their role, and it doesn't do good to anyone. And the people of Israel themselves also don't realize why they exist and what's the origin that brings them together. That's why they're trying to assimilate and be like everyone else and try to dissolve that Jewish identity, but they can't. It's impossible, because there is a natural dynamic here. It's embedded in nature that through a certain group of representatives of humanity, this connection needs to happen. And so the establishment of the country of Israel, the state of Israel, and the nation of Israel, I don't even relate to that name as in its true, they're not even, they don't merit the meaning of their name. And if we're not going to realize the true meaning of our role, we'll be thrown out of here. Because the natural force that drives our development, that gave us this opportunity, will also scatter us if it doesn't work. This is what happens.
Dr. Laitman, I would like to just probe a little deeper on the issue of the Bible that Mark brought up, because I know it's a stumbling block for many people. They open up this book, they read it as some sort of a half historic, half mythological document that talks about some gruesome things that the vengeful God is doing, these people that are separate, that are chosen. I mean, there's a lot of kind of resistance when people read that. Maybe you can explain what is this book actually talking about according to the wisdom of Kabbalah? How should one even interpret all those things? Maybe that would help shed some light on that.
I think that, well, without going into the depth of the Torah, because that will require us to thousands of years of scrutiny. To make it simple, the general rule of the Torah that it's actually trying to express is love thy friend as thyself, among everyone, all people, which means that we need to resemble the global force of nature. That's what the Torah is trying to teach. And it's overcoming all the differences, all the conflicts, meaning we don't eliminate the differences and the uniqueness and the negative attitudes that we have and the conflicts that we have, the differences that make us unique. We don't cancel them. There is a negative force of separation between human beings that needs to remain. It needs to remain. It's a negative force. But in addition to it, there is also a positive, unifying force of nature, and what we're supposed to do is combine them, both the positive and the negative. And that's where humans can live. And so the negative force awakens naturally, it grows naturally, there's a natural process of its growth. The positive force, we have to consciously work on attracting it from nature. That's what the wisdom of Kabbalah talks about. The wisdom of Kabbalah is about how to realize the interior of the Torah. What you hear about in the Torah sounds like a historical story. Of course. But the wisdom of Kabbalah doesn't talk about that. It talks about what's the actual core, the meaning of the story. You see that people can interpret the Bible however they want if they look at it as a historical document. But the actual natural laws that it's referring to is eventually, in a nutshell, that love thy friend as thyself, or love covers all crimes, it is called. Again, it's talking about two forces, negative force that awakens by itself, and positive force that we attract consciously. And both forces need to exist for evolution to continue. And in fact, the balance between these two forces is what drives all of evolution in nature in general. We have a conscious balancing act in it. Please, Dr. Mark.
Well, I've listened very carefully. It sounds like you have a message both for humanity in general and a message for the Jewish people in particular. And it sounds as if you're saying that as important as the message is for humanity, it's a special message for the Jewish people. But it's very hard to reconcile what you are saying about this message with what at least I and most Jews, I think, understand, because the Torah says the Jewish people are a people that shall not be reckoned among the peoples of the world. You shall be a people that shall dwell alone. You shall not be like all the rest of humanity. At least that's the understanding that many people get from reading the Torah. And so, and in fact, this separateness is a viewpoint that is emphasized by many modern Jewish leaders and Jewish rabbis, both religious and political leaders of Israel and of the Jewish people. So, as enlightening and as good as the message sounds, it sounds to be very different than the message that we hear from Jewish leaders, both religious and secular, in the world we live in today.
Sure, because they know nothing about the wisdom of Kabbalah, which is why that Torah was given to the people of Israel. The Torah comes from that unifying force of connection above all the egoistic differences between human beings. Now, most people don't know it. It's a result of almost or more than 2,000 years since we lost that human connection, since we fell into an exponential growth of the human ego. That's what we refer to as unfounded hatred, and that's what was symbolized as the ruin of the Second Temple. So today, that hatred still prevails, and that's what there is. So the truth is, you don't need to listen to what most these leaders are saying, because what they do is just continue leading the common people and trying to just make the best out of it. What we're talking about is only those who understand the issue of human unity and love, and they are the Kabbalistic leaders, and they are very despised by most of the population. If you'll ask me, I'll tell you, the way the other Jews relate to me is worse than how anti-Semites do.
You can excuse me or for other people who, of course, we don't hear your message. What we hear from Jewish leaders, both religious leaders and political leaders, is a very different message. And that's the message that seems to be the operative one, seems to be the one by which Jews and non-Jews relate with each other in the world today. And so as long as the message is the one that we hear today, it's hard to see how there can be a reconciliation and a resolving of this very difficult problem.
לא, פיוס לא יכול להיות. פיוס
You're
לא
right.
יכול להיות.
You're right. Also this peace this way will not happen. Some pacifying between these groups won't happen. By the way, I don't think that's a good thing. That we need it. I think it's actually the pressure and the hatred from the nations of the world towards Israel that will eventually pressure that group of Israel to carry out their vocation, their metaphysical role, if you will. I'm not looking at anti-Semitism as something that needs to be, to end, because it's a natural dynamic. It comes as a natural result of the incorrect behavior of Jews. And that's why I see anti-Semitism as a vital role in a vital force in the system, because without it, that group, that people of Israel, would make even more problems and would scatter completely. So anti-Semitism, in a sense, guards that group, the people of Israel. However, it needs to be more direct, more on point, more directed, not just hatred for no reason and not violent, but rather it needs to be pressure of telling that group, you have to serve your role in the system, you have to demonstrate your role in the world. And if you don't do it, all of us are going into a crisis. Look at what's happening in the world. And gradually, on all levels, we'll see ourselves in crisis, on all levels of nature. This group has to enable this correction for all of human society. That's why, if I'm speaking to you, I would say, let's pressure together that group, but in a correct way, in a positive way. Humanity must, that group must open their method and enable it for the whole world, so that everyone can rise together to a unity that is above all differences and sense that positive force of nature. Today, human society is driven only by the negative force in different facets, in different ways. We don't realize that there is a positive force of nature. It exists. It's just hidden. And we reject it instead of attracting it. I hope this is something we can work on together.
Yes, I think we have some common ground, but I think what all people of goodwill, what all people who care about humanity, all reasonable people want to avoid above all, is a great war, is terrible human suffering and conflict and death. And we want to avoid, of course, anything that's going to lead in that direction. And it's very difficult, given the trends and the processes that are taking place, to see how we're going to avoid a problem like this. Because right now, as I think I tried to explain earlier on, there is this great contradiction. It's this irreconcilable clash and this problem. I don't see how it can be avoided unless we have a greater awareness of the problem, unless there are discussions like this one, and pointing toward a solution that will be in the best interest of everyone, of all humanity.
So, Dr. Laitman, in closing, what should Jewish people do now? If we had to tell them something now, they don't have time to hear the whole thing necessarily. What people like Mark, like yourself, others were hearing it and asking themselves, okay, Jews are people of unity. What does that mean? Who do we unite with? What do we do? What's the next step?
Good point.
So first of all, Jews need to realize, they need to recognize that anti-Semitism is actually embedded in nature. It is like a law that works towards them on the condition that they don't fulfill their role in the system. The moment they will begin to carry out their role of human connection, gradually, of course, it's a process, but the moment they will begin to also demonstrate and bring in all the nations of the world into a higher level of unity. And again, this is written in the ancient book of Zohar, in Kabbalistic texts that are written 2,000 years ago and before, if they begin to carry out that role, everything will subside in the sense of the hatred towards them and also the joining of humanity. All the nations will come together. Everyone will understand what's happening here. What's the historical process we're going through? Who are the Jews? The Jews are simply a collection of all the different nations and clans and tribes from Babylon. Later, that group scattered again across humanity, but it's a collection of all the different nations, and it's a group that finally now, hopefully, will begin to realize its positive role towards the world in showing and demonstrating a higher level of social unity. And then all nations of the world will be able to follow that. Look, why is that group so powerful? Why? How can it be? How can 0.2% of the world have so much power? It's because they possess that power across the human network, but they use it negatively, not towards connection, because it's after they lost their level of connection. If they change their vector, therefore, towards positive human connection, they will radiate it across the whole world. And now this is something that group needs to listen to, but all the world needs to join this and listen to it. And so we want to make a situation where hatred is fine towards the Jews, but it needs to have a direction. Why do we hate you, guys? Let's say not just because you're running the banks and the governments and the media and all that. Sure, but it's because you're actually more than that. You're holding the key to social unity and to the life, to a higher level of human life. This is the correct demand that needs to appear towards the people of Israel. That's why I said earlier, I'm not expecting anti-Semitism to disappear. I'm expecting it, hoping for it to get the right direction, the right packaging.
I know we have to close, but there's really one clarification I want to add here. I mean, ask of you, Dr. Laitman, because you talked about the influence. Joe Biden made this comment in 2013 about the immense influence the Jews had in America. If you ask a lot of Jewish people, they'll say, we're already using our innate power of connection for the good. We advance social ideals and so on and so forth. But clearly it's not. So maybe we can kind of clarify exactly what does it mean to use the power of connection in the right way? What does that mean?
For the good of all of mankind, not for the Jews themselves. The Jews can't work that way. They have to work for the positive connection of all human society, to look at all of humanity becoming this sphere of human connection, where the good of everyone is the goal. That needs to be at least the aim of everyone you can really call a Jew. The fact that they managed to make a good place for them in America, what's happening is that they're using the force that they acquired from a higher connection, they're taking advantage of it for earthly goals. And that is an incorrect use, and that's why it awakens negative hatred.
Well, but they'll say they created social networks, they allow people to
Come on. What networks of connection between banks? What? That's what you call human connection. The fact that they came up with Google and Facebook, that's not the social network that needs to emerge that we're talking about. That's just you like taking egoists and allowing them to better infuse hatred into the system. I don't see any positive consequence from that. And that is why this is coming from Jews. Look, they sense at their root how it's possible to drive different things in human society. They have that power. But their attitude after the ruin is negative, because they work in the opposite way to their root. We have to go back to that root of using that method of connection for love and unity, and only then it'll work positively. Well, let's hope that together with Dr. Mark Weber, we maybe will have another chance to talk, and I'll be very happy to hear more from you.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Of course, right now, the world is very worried about war, and this is in the minds of everyone around the world right now. And we want at all costs to avoid a big conflict in the another big conflict in the Middle East involving Iran and Israel and the United States. But anything that will create greater unity among humanity and a more peaceful world, that's all very good, of course. But it's very difficult to reconcile your message with what we hear from Jewish leaders like Netanyahu and other people in the United States who preach something quite different. But okay.
Well, there's work to do.
גם אותי הם לא שומעים, מה לעשות?
They don't listen to me as well. Maybe, we'll hear it from each other, yeah.
Okay.
I want to wish you a lot of good power and health, and be well, and let's try to succeed in this.
Well, I've enjoyed our conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark Weber. Dr. Laitman, please like, share, comment below. I want to hear what you have to say, and we want to keep having those conversations. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.